The night Sadie disappeared, I watched her struggle with the back latch on my father's '73 Chevy and thought how we were only ever going to be good at leaving each other. My parents had gone to a dinner party at the Pearsons, the rich neighbors with the tamed hedges, so we had the concrete world of the driveway to ourselves. She wore my brother's old windbreaker, too long in the arms, the blue hood cinched so tight her freckles bunched up at the cheeks. She was delicate, in the way that made you want to touch her, to keep checking she was still there. I handed her the duffel. She said, "Don't wait up," and grinned like a cartoon wolf, teeth big and daring and doomed. I sat on the cold step and counted her footsteps until they were swallowed by the hush of the street. Later, the news would call her missing, and there'd be posters with graduation photos above the word "last seen." But I knew right then, Sadie was never the type to stay found. Inside, I watched the flecks in the porch light float like spun sugar and tried to picture her at the edge of town, wind in her face, rocking the gas pedal on the highway out of here. The absence of her laughter, which had always arrived before she did, crowded every room in the house. When my parents came home, Dad's tie crooked, Mom's slap-happy from boxed wine, no one asked about Sadie, not that night, not the next. I felt the sharpness of her absence more on Wednesdays, when it would rain and the drip from the eaves sounded like someone tapping out a code, urgent and secret, on the roof. After 2 weeks, they found the Chevy idling by Kilbourne Lake. Half a tank bled into the grass, windshield fogged with the exhale of late summer. A fisherman discovered it, hooks dragging weeds, a thermos of beer sweating in his palm. Sadie's bag was there, unzipped and gaping, and her windbreaker still in the passenger seat, balled up and damped with old tears. It became a matter for the sheriff's department. Heartsick men in uniform tramping mud into our living room, their notebook pages smudged by rain and cigarette ash. Mom hung the phone by its cord and whispered to no one she wouldn't, as if the words themselves could redeem her. For a while, our house filled with casseroles and the soft parade of neighbors who never looked you in the eye. Someone printed out another photo of Sadie, where she's standing in front of the band trailer, middle finger raised, hair lit up like copper wire from the sun. The picture made its rounds, fastened to our fridge with a magnet, a relic no one wanted but no one could refuse. At the funeral, there was no body, so they settled for a shrine of her favorite things. My parents sat in the front pew, stunned into a serenity that bordered on sleep. I wondered what the other parents thought as I watched her best friend Trinity scatter Skittles on the altar steps, like Sadie might come shrieking out from the narthex to pelt her back. Nights, I wandered down to the edge of the lake and threw rocks at the stars, listening for the echo of her voice. Sometimes, when the wind came off the water, I'd imagine I heard it, her laugh, thin and mocking, woven through the bullfrog's chorus. The sheriff's men gave up the search, blaming personal choice and no sign of struggle, but the town buzzed with stories. Sightings at the truck stop, a note left at the drive-through window. Trinity said she'd seen someone matching Sadie's hunched-over run, barefoot and muddy, sprinting west through the soybean fields. I pretended to believe these stories so she wouldn't feel crazy. By October, the search had whittled Sadie down to a myth. There were vigils, staged for the local news, candles guttering against the mean cut-off wind. I stayed away from those, afraid to see the look on people's faces. Instead, I stole her windbreaker from the evidence box in my parents' closet and wore it inside out, the lining rough against my skin, the pockets filled with sand and matchbooks, and a crumpled stub of a movie ticket. It was the closest I could get to her, residue and memory, zipped up tight. The morning I turned 16, I went to the lake and found the Chevy gone, just tire ruts bitten into the mud, and a plague of beer cans rattling underfoot. I sat where the car had been, knees pressed to my chest, and waited for the sun to break through. This time, I didn't think about escape or vanishing. but about the old latch Sadie had fumbled with, how it had stuck for years and would probably always stuck, no matter how many times you forced it open. In the distance, a bird called, and wind made ripples carried all the way to shore. I counted each one until it dissolved, careful not to lose my place. For 3 days, I wore the windbreaker everywhere, like a dare or a curse, letting the hood hang loose so my hair fell in my eyes the way hers did. I pretended not to notice the stares at school or the way Trinity gripped my sleeve when she caught me alone by the trophy cases. Nobody had much to say, which suited me fine. I started to sleep with the windbreaker balled up under my head, the nylon smell sharp as battery acid, and after a while, I stopped dreaming about Sadie entirely. Instead, I woke to an ache in my shoulders and the faintest echo of someone whispering my name, once, then again, softer each time. The wind picked up at night, even when the weather said it shouldn't. Shadows inched across my ceiling, reedy and formless, and sometimes I caught a glimpse of a color so pale it barely existed. The spaces Sadie used to fill, the porch steps, the back seat of the Chevy, the bend in the trail where the pine needles went orange and pungent, started to feel crowded by her lack, like a shape pressed into memory foam. When Mom found the windbreaker in the laundry basket, she balled it up with the dish towels and bit her tongue until the taste of iron bled past her lips. That Saturday, with Dad at work and the house thick with silence, I unzipped the windbreaker's liner and found wedged deep in the seam a scrap of notebook paper folded neat as origami, Sadie's handwriting in green marker, all sharp loops and slanted crosses. Don't let them tell you the woods are empty. They're only quiet because they're listening. I tucked the note into my sock drawer and didn't mention it to anyone. The following week, I started cutting through the stand of pines behind the school on my way home, keeping to the trail that Sadie used to run when she was late for first period. At the third turn, where the roots buckled up through the dirt and the air smelled like sap, I'd pause and listen, not for her voice exactly, but for the hush she left behind. It was in the way the branches clacked together overhead, in the sharp snap of twigs that always seemed just out of step with my own. After a while, the whispers became routine, a background fizz I could almost ignore. Almost. But as Halloween neared and the lake froze over, they got bolder. A low pulse threading through my headphones, a hiss of syllables teasing the ends of my sentences. At Trinity's annual sleepover, we watched old slasher movies and ate popcorn until our stomachs turned, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sadie's face flicker at the edge of the TV screen, mouth open in a secret I'd never hear. One night, a hard frost whitening the lawn, I found myself out at Kilbourne Lake again, hands jammed in my jacket, breath burning in my chest. The air crackled with quiet, and below the ice, I thought I heard more than just the moan of settling water. I crouched at the shore, boots sinking into the slush, and let the cold numb my fingertips. Long after midnight, I ran my own hand along the place where the Chevy used to be and whispered her name, too quiet to carry. The ice didn't answer, but behind me, in the blackness, the wind curled around my ears and pulled my voice away.
The first whisper came faint as lint, a skein across the water. Not gone, you know. I snapped up. The windbreaker seemed digging hard into my neck, and watched the pale slurry of fog permanently haunting the opposite bank. The voice wasn't Sadie's, at least not the Sadie who invented limericks about the gym teacher or could French braid her own hair walking backwards. No, this Sadie sounded drained of motive, low and near, like the hum you get in your guts when you lie and almost believe yourself. I waited, certain I'd only heard the silence flex, but the whisper returned, chasing the next gust. Not gone. Waiting. The library had a single computer with dial-up, and I spent school nights hunched over it, searching for any mention of Sadie. Forums, obituaries, the dark, clumsy threads of amateur sleuths. My favorite was a conspiracy about a shadow highway that led out of town. Another time I found a girl on the missing persons database who looked like her, only older, Midwest somewhere, but the update said, "Found alive, living under alternate identity." I copied the image to a floppy and stared at it in my room, wishing I could ask her if it was better wherever she'd gone. At dinner, I learned to eat with one hand, the other fisted in my lap around the windbreaker's teeth. Mom tried again and again. "Do you want more?" Or "How was school?" Like she'd made a pact to keep the kitchen bright through conversational force. Dad's voice was a mile away, and he mostly worked late or took drives that lasted until he returned, glassy-eyed, unsure whether he'd left at all. The whispers increased with the cold. I'd walk to the lake after dark, my shoes filling with slush and my ears burning, but I couldn't keep away. Sometimes I brought a flashlight, sometimes not. The air on the shoreline grew so thin you wanted to swallow it whole. Sometimes Sadie's voice came as a giggle, muffled like she'd buried her face in her hands. Other times it was the blunt end of a dare. "Go ahead," she taunted once when I held a rock over the water. "Show me how far you can throw." I lobbed it, felt the recoil deep in the elbow, and heard her slow clap drifting back. I'd never told anyone about this, maybe because I almost respected her for haunting me more convincingly than she'd ever lived. I tried to stop. I locked her windbreaker up, double-knotted the sleeves, but my sleep filled with dreams of Sadie rattling the Chevy's gear shift, eyes rolled all the way white. So I learned to live with it, the small, private haunting, a worm of her voice twisting in my ear at the back of every class period, every empty hallway. Sadie as a living rumor, trailing me like a sibling shadow. One morning in November, the gym lockers flooded. Boiler busted, pipes blown, and students milled outdoors, shivering and impatient. I found Trinity near the bus circle, punching icicles off a gutter. She saw me and held up a battered folder. "Look familiar?" she said, jerking her chin at the sticker. Sadie's cropped face, a protest sticker from the animal shelter, and a post-it reading, "You rock," but in like a punk way. I nodded, afraid to touch it. Trinity's fingers were raw and bitten. I keep thinking she'll just roll up on her bike, flip me off, and ask for it back. She said it like a joke, but her voice snagged on the words. "What if she's still here?" I blurted. Not sure what I meant, alive or somewhere worse, but Trinity just shrugged. "She's not, but I get it if you need to pretend." She peeled the sticker from the folder, breaking Sadie's face in half, and crumpled it in her hand. At home, I spread Sadie's windbreaker on the bed and lined up the things I'd pilfered in her name. A spent lighter, a Jolly Rancher with the wrapper sucked to glass, the floppy with the stranger's face. I built her a monument, stone by stone, a totem of everything she'd left embered in me. I sat on the floor until the baseboard heater clicked off and the room went full blue. The whisper came again, gentle this time, closer, like breath against the shell of my ear. "Not gone," it said. "Still here." That week, I woke with a cough that tasted of pond water. The drone of the old humidifier went unfamiliar, buzzing one long, arrhythmic wheeze. When I brought my feet to the carpet, the floor felt damp, soaked, actually, the way it did in April when the sump failed and Dad's curses echoed off the cinder block for days. I reached under the bed for the windbreaker, but the sleeve was slimy, heavy with something that stuck to my hand. I flicked the hallway light, and the whole bulb fizzed to a dull orange, casting the wallpaper's fading tulip print into a sickly relief. From the kitchen, a noise, thin, mechanical, but unmistakably deliberate. I held my breath. The air blinked thinner. My first thought was that Mom, forgetting I still needed things like breakfast, had left the kettle to screech itself empty, but the sound had a rhythm, on and off, as if someone were transmitting in code. I eased down the steps, adrenaline warm in the spaces between my ribs. The fridge stood open. On the floor, a line of coffee grounds led from the pantry to the back door, which hung loose off its hinge, crooked like a dislocated jaw. The windbreaker was heavier now, and something inside it squelched. There was a trail, faint and rust-colored, running along the linoleum and then out into the brittle November yard. Dad's truck was in the driveway, driver's side door wide, dome light pinging the darkness. The whole neighborhood felt abandoned. No porch lights, no car engines, no hint of anything alive but the trembling air.
I stepped into the cold and bare feet, windbreaker buttoned to my chin, and followed the path as far as the barn's sagging shadow. The ground was crusted with leaves, but something had flattened them, carved a fresh groove through the frost that led around to the old root cellar. The door was wedged open. I edged up to it, eyes blinded by the glow of Dad's missing maglite, its beam propped upright and aimed into the crawl of darkness. Just inside, the sleeve of my windbreaker caught on a nail, and I heard it rip, a clean, satisfied sound. Beyond the light, the space was woven thick with spiderweb and the smell of old apples going to mush. Something moved at the far end, shuffling, a living shadow, still and then not. I heard her before I saw her, the laugh at first, not a giggle, but the back-of-the-throat tackle of disgusted delight. Then the girl herself, crouched half-human in the slick of mud and trash bags, head bent over a pale slab of nothing that only resolved as Dad's discarded winter boots. She was impossibly thin. Hair wild, face streaked like an animal's, mouth open in a straight line that reminded me of the dead fish in Mr. Riley's 7th-grade aquarium, stuck, grinning, glassy-eyed. Sadie looked up and cocked her head at me, confused by the light, or by my presence, or by whatever she had become since the night she vanished. She rose steady, not shaking, and for a moment I saw the shape of her in the windbreaker's reflection, how small she looked, how unafraid. In her hand was the note I'd hidden in the sock drawer, edges darker now, clumped with soil. She had written more on the back, the same slant, the same frantic green marker, but the message was bone simple this time. Woods never empty. Some things wait longer. I reached for her, and this time she didn't flinch. Her skin was hot, feverish, and there was a pulse under her wrist that thrummed like a hummingbird's wing. She smiled, but it was an apology, a warning. Then she shoved the note into my open palm, hard enough to drive a knife nail into my skin, and spun away, out past the light, dissolved into the wide white yard. I staggered after, barefoot and numb, but the only proof of her was the path trampled through the frost, winding back to the woods behind our house. And just like that, Sadie wasn't missing anymore. She was everywhere. She was at school, never in the same place twice, a flash of blue at the end of the math wing, a stolen soda from the snack bar, a silhouette on the visitors' bleachers at dusk. She slunk through the town's arteries, corner stores, the half-shuttered Main Street, even the library, where she'd leave post-it riddles and books for me to find. The stories changed. Now she was a ghost or a prophet or some kind of test for kids who hung their hope on the vacant places people left behind. Even Trinity started to believe, those raw hands trembling when she saw the printout of Sadie's face taped to the front office door. See something, say something, scrawled in ballpoint at the bottom. At home, the changes mounted slow. Mom stopped cooking, except for the boxed macaroni we ate in shifts. The phone rang with hang-ups, or with the old neighbor repeating rumors of night visitors in the backyards off Elm. Dad switched from whiskey to water, but the latter never made it past the first glass. I taped Sadie's new note above my bed and waited for the next sign, certain now that she was leading me towards something, some final, necessary dare. It came one dawn before snow, the world blue and brittle and mean. I woke to the smell of wet pine needles, and in the living room, every window was frosted with fingerprints, smeared in impossible patterns, a language I couldn't translate. In the center of the carpet, Sadie's windbreaker, inside out, the lining stitched through with objects from a life that wasn't mine, a house key to a place we'd never lived, a rabbit's paw, what looked like a baby tooth, and at the very bottom, a sliver of mirror cracked almost in half. In the glass, my face stared back, and behind it, flickering, the outline of Sadie, watching, patient, waiting for me to see her. I put on the jacket. It fit perfectly. That morning, I walked the frozen trail behind the school, tracing the roots and ruts Sadie had mapped for me. Up ahead, the branches bowed and parted, and she was there, grinning, 2 sets of footprints side by side in the hardening earth. I caught up to her, and for once, she let me. She took my hand, and we walked, not looking back until the sun started to rise, turning the woods to gold. The wind was gone now, but in my ear, her voice, full and certain, and mine, said, "Don't let go." I never did. The next day, Trinity left a note in my locker, folded over itself until it fit in the slot like something grown there. It wasn't a joke or a dare, just a single line and a time, as if she trusted I'd decode the rest. Basement. After practice. It's about her. I cut out before the last bell and drifted into the main stairwell, past the trophy cases honeyed by afternoon sun, and down to the hollow where the janitors kept their custodial secrets. The basement was colder than upstairs, heavy with the bleach-sharp smell of industrial mop. I found Trinity waiting by the vending machines, picking at her thumbnail, eyes rimmed red. She held up a Ziploc bag, clouded with fingerprint powder, and labeled personal effects. Inside was a phone, Sadie's, recognizable by the sticker mosaic plastered over the shell like dragon scales. "Found it in the art room desk," Trinity said, voice almost a whisper. "Some kid must have been hiding it, but—" She let the rest hang. My fingers buzzed. The phone was heavy, slick with bagged condensation. I slipped it in the windbreaker's pocket. It buzzed. A new email alert. Address scrambled, but unmistakable. "Take the trail. You'll know when." That night, I walked, not to the lake, but toward the fiber cable service road, bare dirt and ragged chain link, the sky blue with thread of snow. The wind was back, catching loose bits in the air, but woven underneath was the familiar thread, not a whisper, but Sadie's laugh, daring me on. At the end of the trail was a hole where the road had caved in, orange mesh fencing drooping like melted candy. The work lights were dimmed, but at the bottom, the dirt had been scraped raw, and a ladder led down. I climbed, windbreaker pulled tight against the cold. The pit was narrow but deep, ribbed with mud and icicle. At the bottom, the blue light of a phone screen flickered. Next to it, a coil of company cable, a lunchbox, an insulated mug just like the one Dad used to haul. Then, just beyond, Sadie's boots, knees to chest, huddled in the lee of the excavation. Her eyes met mine, and she grinned, wolfish, proud. She said, "I told you, they only keep the woods quiet so you don't hear who's waiting underneath." We sat, not talking, while the air warmed around us with our breath and the slow thump of the water table beneath the town. Above, the night. We sat, not talking, while the air warmed around us with our breath and the slow thump of the water table beneath the town. Above, the night bled in through the mesh, and I listened for the echo that had always been one voice short. When I looked again, she pressed the phone into my hand, fingers hot and insistent. "Read it," she said, "and then decide if you want to leave or stay." There was a message, waiting in drafts. The subject line was blank, but the body was green marker, a row of slanting, frantic letters. "They only find the ones who want to be found." Sadie's voice, Sadie's laugh, and mine. I sent the email and waited for the world to catch up. Stranger things bloom in the seams of a winter town after midnight. I walked home with Sadie at my side, her hands jammed deep in the windbreaker's pockets, stride gone gangly and wild again, like she was learning to wear her old skin. No one else saw us, not the cop car creeping past, or the neighbor's porch light flaring as we crossed the gutter. For them, nothing had changed. It was still me, blue hood up, alone in the frost. But Sadie laughed whenever my breath showed on the air and hers didn't. She laughed so hard sometimes I had to shush her, afraid she'd tip the whole brittle quiet into chaos. The next day, in school, her presence braided tighter around me. She lived just at the edge of vision, perched on the radiator while I doodled through algebra, rolling her eyes at every pre-calc answer I got wrong. I could feel her in the slam of the locker next to mine, in the static hum of the hallway fluorescents, in the tickle at the nape of my neck when I crossed the gym. Sometimes Sadie would stand between me and a teacher, and it was like the world blurred. The teacher's voice droned on as if through a sock, echoing strange, and I'd snap back to find a question waiting for me and no memory of what was asked. She was insatiable with curiosity now,
pawing through my memories, asking about things that never used to interest her. Did I believe in ghosts? What did I think happened to feelings that never got said out loud? Did I remember the time at Kilbourne when we found the dead deer and she poked it with a stick until the ants spoiled out? I lied and said I didn't. She smirked like she knew I'd lied and told the story anyway. It got worse, or better, depending, when I realized she could slip into other places, rooms I hadn't been, lockers I didn't own. She'd come back with trivia, which teachers hated which, who cried in the bathroom, what secrets the vice principal kept locked in his desk. She took special joy in finding things about Trinity, who'd started painting lines of metallic blue on her eyelids and wore her sadness in harsher colors now. Sadie would wordlessly hand me these exploits, like a cat drops birds, and watch me squirm. At home, the show was subtler. Mom's eyes glazed when I walked in with wet footprints that weren't my own. Dad peeled off his boots in the garage and never noticed the extra pair left at the mat. Only the dog seemed to sense it. Blinker, who'd hiss and hide under the bed when I came down with Sadie's laughter trailing behind me, then reemerge when it was just me, alone with the hum of the fridge and the boxed macaroni on the stovetop. We settled into a rhythm, Sadie and me, like two pilots sharing a single body. I talked to her in the woods, on the edge of parking lots, wherever the blue hour stretched the world thin. She asked less about leaving, more about what came next, about whether I'd ever thought of running, really running, with nothing but what you could fit in a jacket. She never asked about the night she left, or why the Chevy's back seat was stained with tears, or why I could find her now when no one else could. She just walked beside me, hungry for noise, shivering with the effort of staying present. Then one night, I followed a flash of her through the stand of pines behind the track field, and we ended up at Kilbourne. The lake was glass, black and waiting, rimmed with the first whiff of snow. She stopped at the edge and crouched, staring out. Her hair whipped around her face, and her eyes had a shine to them, something blassier than memory. I used to think that if you looked hard enough at the surface, you could see what's below, but it's always just you looking back. I knelt beside her, the windbreaker drawn close. You could jump in. It's not that deep. She smiled, teeth bone white in the gloom. You never liked water. You never liked being dared. She licked her lips. So dare me then. I hesitated, but the air thinned again, that same pressure drop from before. Okay, I dare you to... She didn't wait. She bolted upright, sprinted to the dock, boots thudding on the frozen boards, and leapt with arms overhead, cutting the moon's line. She hit the ice and broke through with a neat crack, not a scream or splash to be heard. I ran to the dock's end and looked down. Below the skin of new ice, two silhouettes hovered there, ours, tangled together, faces pressed side by side. I saw her grin, felt her hand on mine, and then she was pulling me through. The cold was absolute, but so was the clarity. Down there, beneath the hush, were all the things we'd left unsaid. Every joke, every dare, every time I could have chased her but held back. She gripped my arm and we drifted, weightless, the bind tight as blood. When I broke surface, I knew Sadie wouldn't follow me out. She was still there, below, keeping watch with the other lost things. But now, wherever I went, class, home, or just roaming the black streets, her presence was sewn to me. She'd changed a little, less wild, more patient. She waited for me to speak and listened, her laughter folded into the pause. Sometimes, when I walked alone by the lake, her reflection would appear in the water beside mine, not quite synchronized, but always close enough. Not gone. Never gone. After a month, the stories about Sadie faded from the halls. Trinity got into gymnastic stunts, bruised her knees, stopped wearing blue for a while. Mom redecorated, Dad's late drives grew longer, slower. Winter thawed the corners of town, and soon, no one talked about the missing girl with the windbreaker anymore. Not even me. Not out loud.
But at night, when the frost returned and the windows silvered over, I'd wake to hear her voice, low and steady, spelling out the code I'd always missed in the tap of the rain. Stay wild. Stay lost. Never let the quiet win. I'd clutch the windbreaker's left sleeve, stitched at the seam where she'd torn it, and mouth the words along with her. A duet for the vanished and for the ones who could still remember. Because in the end, the woods were never empty, and neither was I.
That was the winter the animals started turning up wrong. First it was fish, which hardly counted. Every year they iced over at Kilbourne, bellies up under glass, awaiting spring rot. But then a deer washed ashore, ribs distended and scraped hollow, fur dawn stripy and translucent as cheap cellophane. On the last day before Christmas break, a crow nosedived onto the blacktop during an assembly, smashing itself so hard against the gym windows that blood streaked the glass for a week. The story was it had been flying backwards, like rewinding a tape. I barely blinked at the news. I was already seeing things no one wanted cataloged. The first time it happened, I was walking home in the gray hour, cutting across the frozen baseball diamonds, Sadie's voice in my ear reciting rhymes about witches and mothers. I passed by the old snack bar and saw, in the thin slant of dusk, a blue-gray handprint smeared across the cinder block wall. Not paint, not blood. Something sticky, a wetness that steamed in the cold. I reached for it, Sadie's dare, then yanked my hand away. The print pulsed faintly, as if with a heartbeat, before it faded into the block. At the next day's assembly, I stared at the stain the crow had left, and through the dark charge in the air I saw shapes shiver across it. Initials nested in each other, a spiral, the impression of a wolf's head rendered in negative space. I started cataloging these stigmata, kept a spiral notebook in my backpack, filled its lackluster pages with diagrams of circles, arrows, secret alphabets only Sadie and I could recognize. If I kept up with it, her laughter would echo approval in my skull, sometimes so loud I'd flinch. At first I thought it was just me, but then Trinity began to notice too, started asking pointed questions, staring a little too long at the blue under my fingernails or the scabs that refused to heal at my cuticles. The change in her was gradual. She started wearing her gym socks rolled over her knees, stopped using the girls' bathroom alone. Sometimes she'd scuff her shoe over a rune drawn in salt on the ChemLab linoleum, like she wanted to prove she didn't care, while her eyes, sharper now, trailed after me in the hall. The night it got real, there was a blackout. The whole block lost power at dusk, and with it the hum of civilization. No porch lights, no television, just the raw scrape of wind in the eaves. I couldn't sleep, and Sadie's itching presence made it worse. So I zipped up her windbreaker and slipped outside. The cold coated my teeth and dulled them. I walked. At the corner of Mill and Fifth, the streetlights flickered briefly, then died. But the sidewalk glowed faint, marked every 10 feet with a new blue handprint, each a little smaller than my own. I followed them past the shuttered elementary and out toward the old quarry, where the hands converged at the mouth of a drainage tunnel. Inside, the air was pre-chewed, sour, electric. I hesitated only briefly. The part of me that was still me shuddered, while Sadie's dare bristled, gleeful. I ducked in. It was dark, not cave dark, but a deep, resonant dark that hummed with unfinished sentences. The walls on either side were glossy with graffiti, none of it familiar. Instead of the usual tags, dirty jokes, high school names, dicks and pipe dreams, these were symbols. Spirals, double triangles, jagged teeth in a repeating row. The further I went, the more the shapes looked like the ones Sadie and I traced in the notebook. I kept walking. At the end of the tunnel, light flickered. I pressed forward, then froze. The far wall was covered, floor to ceiling, in desperate rainbow marker, and at its center sat Sadie, or what she'd become, hunched over a collapsed camping lantern, her arm striped with marker and scab. She looked up and grinned, as if she'd always been waiting. "Welcome to Kilbourne's Mouth," she said, and her voice doubled in the echo, phasing an octave above itself. I joined her. For a while we just sat, cross-legged, each waiting for the other to speak first. I wanted to ask why she called or what she needed, but the question withered in my throat. Instead, I stared at the symbols on the wall. Some matched the ones I'd seen around town, others throbbed with new meaning. Sadie pointed at them. Story time for the doomed. "That's the holding sign," she said, tapping a split oval. "Means someone's listening but hasn't decided yet." She trailed her finger to the next, a jagged line bisected by an arrow. "And that's the path sign. Don't follow it unless you want to get turned inside out." Further down, a spiral split by a hash. "Want to know what this means?" She didn't wait for my answer. "This is the mark they leave when you're a goner, but too stubborn to vanish." I raised my sleeve. There, faint and recent, a spiral lined in green. Turned it over, and the same. Only this time the spiral looked more open, like a nautilus unraveling. Sadie giggled, a shiver of delight. "See? Even dead, I can't stop tagging you." Her joy, sharp and wild, made my teeth ache. We talked, or at least I thought we did. Time in the tunnel stretched like taffy, hours gone in what felt like minutes. I left with my hands stained in marker, my notebook packed with new diagrams, and the sense I'd just shooken hands with a coiled wire, thrumming with something primeval and mean. After, the marks multiplied. Whomever made them switched modes, sometimes only visible as wet impressions in the snow, other times scorched into the sidewalk, blue-black and impossible. I started seeing them on people, too. A spiral on the back of a crossing guard's hand, a line of triangles dotting the neck of the substitute English teacher. Trinity saw them now all the time, and her questions got less subtle. "I saw the thing by the lake," she hissed one morning, eyes glassy and wide. "It was wearing your jacket." I stared at the photo. The girl's face was warped by the lens, the eyes stretched wider and darker than they should have been. On the sleeve of the parka, a row of marks, spiral, triangle, split oval, repeated like a chant. We didn't speak for a long time. I just sat, notebook in lap, tracing my fingernail over the spiral on my wrist, wondering if this was acceptance or surrender, if there was even a difference anymore. After Trinity left, I zipped up the windbreaker and walked the town alone. The night pressed close on either side, and every surface shimmered with the residue of Sadie's code. Sometimes I'd pass a window and see myself reflected, my face blurring in the glass, a blue glow in the hollows under my eyes. Once I heard a giggle, not Sadie's, but a newer, meaner version, and I shivered, part fear, part pride. The marks spread faster after that. By May, every kid in school was tracing them on their arms in Sharpie, carving them into desktops, banding them around ankles and throats. None of them knew what it meant, but I did. The message was clear now, at the bottom of every page in my notebook, written in Sadie's frantic marker. The woods are never empty.
1 week into June, elementary school let out, and the first kid went missing for real. Not a running away, not an overnight at a cousin's or a grandma's after a fight with a stepdad. Gone, vanished, like a trick of the sun. He left for the playground, a ginger second grader with a bowl cut and a puffy neon vest, and didn't come back. They found his scooter at the park, and the only clue was a set of blue-green spirals, crayoned up and down the monkey bars, as if marking territory. For 36 hours, the whole of Kilbourne moved as one beast. Police, search dogs, volunteer parents in sun hats and fanny packs, all combing the blocks from creek to culvert. I watched them from the curb with Sadie's jacket on, the twill darkened by sweat, and waited for the all clear. The child returned. But it didn't happen. The updates went from hourly to nothing. The father, a papered alcoholic with a busted jaw, sat on the church steps and smoked in silence. The mother's soft wail loosened the windows at night for 3 blocks. The second kid went 3 days later. She was a friend of a friend's cousin, gone missing on the north side, her pink sandal discovered halfway between the weed lot and her front porch. This time the howl woke me. At first I thought it was a freight train's Doppler in the distance, but it built, gaining harmony, until it was a whole pack of voices overlaid and clawing for air. The dog curled beneath my bed and pissed itself, legs trembling so hard the frame juddered against the wall.
"Don't let go," the voices said, over and over, and I nearly believed it was only mine and Sadie's, until a third tiny voice, raw, new, joined the chorus. The next day, the candlelight vigil in the park drew 100 people, but the marks had already multiplied on every swing, slide, and trash can from here to the road out of town. One detective, shipped in from the capital, offered to dust the monkey bars for prints, but the prints overlapped and ran, thousands of them, like a shoal of eels. "It's impossible," he said, then left for lunch. "Someone's pulling a prank and it's disgusting." After the fifth child, 3 in Kilbourne, 2 in the next town downriver, the news stopped coming. The families were interviewed, the search maps extended, but the adults only talked about stranger danger and curfews. Meanwhile, in the margin between waking and crash, I saw the marks bloom across my own arms, faint under the skin but gaining pigment the longer I watched. Trinity's mother pulled her from school and homeschooled her at the kitchen table, but Trinity still met me out by the lake, her wrists banded with sharpied spirals, her cuticles bitten to shit. "They're using kids now," she said flatly, watching the shimmer on the water as the sun bled out behind the trees. "Who is?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Trinity shrugged in a new way, older than the weeks since Sadie reffed. "The thing that started with Sadie. The thing you bring with you everywhere." She touched my jacket, traced the dirt-blackened seam. "It's like a virus, but it's smart. It only takes who it wants." I thought about Sadie's rules, about the notebook, about the hunger in her laugh, the way she collected secrets, hoarding them like sugar packets. "What if it's not trying to hurt them?" I asked. Trinity's lips twisted, jagged. "That's almost worse." At night, the marks glowed if I let my eyes unfocus. Like veins under the skin of the town, phosphor bright, mapping every place a vanished kid had been. I dreamed in symbols, pack signs and holding patterns, hands reaching out of the drainage tunnels, dragging at my ankles as I ran past. I woke with scratches on my calves, dirt under my nails, and a taste in my mouth like old iron. The adults talked about deviant cults, about loners and rootless teens. They talked about me sometimes. I heard the school nurse telling the principal, "She's always where the marks are," and Mom on the phone murmuring, "Maybe she needs treatment." But no one called the cops, really. The hunt had gone out of them. It was like the town had accepted a new logic. Kids disappeared, and the rest carried on, waiting for their number to come up. Sadie visited nightly now. She'd stand at the edge of the yard, hair blown wild, the apparition of a younger self wreathed in moonlight. Sometimes her shape doubled and blurred, and I'd see not just her, but the outlines of the lost kids behind her, every grin hollowed by appetite, every hand smeared blue at the palm. "Soon," she'd sing, like a seesaw riddle, "it'll be everyone." I started eating meals on the porch, away from Mom's wet, drifting gaze. I watched the bike paths for movement, kept a running tally of the hollow spaces kids left behind. Shoe prints in sand, a half-empty blue slush in a tube, a child's backpack left tied to a fence, the zippers all undone. Wherever I marked a loss, the spiral showed up the next day, brighter, deeper, shining with intention. The Tuesday after the 10th child vanished, the town called an emergency meeting at the rec center. The DARE banner still hung, faded from last fall. The mayor, a flat-faced man with hands like raw ham, stood at the podium and sputtered words about community vigilance and restoring safety. No one mentioned that the marks had grown denser, more elaborate, so that whole sections of sidewalk now looked like blueprints for an anatomical model of Kilbourne. No one mentioned the howling, or the silhouettes that trailed power lines at night, hanging like ragged mascots. I sat at the back with the other leftovers and tried not to listen, but the spiral kept pulling at me, dizzying and insistent. That night, as the meeting broke up, Sadie appeared, arms crossed, grin unfinished. "They're getting close," she murmured, words echoing in the empty hall before her mouth moved to finish them. Behind her, the newest missing kids flickered, spectral, their limbs flicking over the plastic chairs and snack tables, blinking in and out like a trick of the gym lights.
"They're not coming back, are they?" I asked. Sadie tilted her head, tried to answer, but her voice frayed and split. "Not in the way you mean. Not the same." I wiped my palms on the windbreaker and walked home without looking for her shadow. The world was smaller now, more of a tunnel than the yard, and everything in it pressed closer to the center. 3 days later, Trinity called me in panic, voice so high that the phone clipped and crackled. "It's my sister. The baby's gone. She was in her crib. I went to the bathroom, and then she was just gone." Trinity was sobbing now, a snot-laced whine. "They say I left the door unlocked, but I didn't. I didn't." I hung up and ran. The air was hot and slick, the sun already low, and the sidewalks outside Trinity's house pulsed with new blue markings, every spiral so fresh it still bled up into the air. There were cops, and Trinity's mother kneeling in the yard, and a neighbor with a camera. But above it all was the feeling, something pulling, magnetic, that if I didn't run now, I'd never run again. The trail led behind the houses, down the alley, across the weed lot, and into the mouth of the storm tunnel. My ears rang with the howl, and with every step, the blue marks beat brighter, strobing through the dark. Inside, Sadie waited, crouched low, arms folded tight across her knees. She was surrounded by the lost, kids with wild eyes, hands ablaze with marker, some bleeding, some doubled or blurred at the edges, every one marked by a growing spiral at the base of the throat. Trinity's baby sister sat in Sadie's lap, quiet, not crying, only staring up as if something wonderful shimmered just out of sight. Sadie saw me and smiled, a smile so sad and wide it nearly split her face. "You brought her," she said. "You always do." I reached for the baby, but Sadie held up a hand. The others gathered close. "We have to," she said, and the words were 100 voices now, each layered with the longing of a child who's lost the map home. "We have to, or it'll never stop." I looked at the baby, at the rest, at Sadie's hands shaking with the strain of holding on. There was a logic to it, an urge older than town or language. We bring them, because if we don't, what comes next is worse. We pass it on, because the thing under the skin of Kilbourne can't be starved, only fed. And it's better, less, if it takes the small ones first. I drew in a breath, the air sharp and live with ozone. The marks on my arms glowed, the windbreaker tight as a second skin. "You're not empty," I said. "None of you are."
Sadie nodded, her eyes rich with blue and something else, regret or hunger, or both. She pressed the baby into my arms, and when I held her, the spiral on her neck pulsed twice, then faded to nothing. The others circled, all of us together, and for a minute, just a minute, the hunger stopped. We walked out of the tunnel, newborn and gangly, Sadie at my side and the rest trailing behind. The sun had gone, but the spirals tracked our steps all the way back down the alley, painting the path for whoever came next. By morning, the missing children would be found, asleep in their beds, each with a faint blue spiral on the softest part of their wrist. Trinity's baby wouldn't remember, neither would most. But the story would grow, hungry and wild, waiting for the next one to dare the woods, the water, the whispering dark. That summer, nobody left Kilbourne. But every night, someone went missing for a little while, and came back changed, the marks multiplying but never breaking pattern. And me? I wore Sadie's windbreaker right through the heat. The pockets filled with new relics, a baby tooth, a lock of hair, the stub of a crayon from the park. She walked with me always, laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes both at once. If I wanted to, I could close my eyes and hear all the voices in the world, layered and infinite, each waiting for the next echo to start. Because the woods, as Sadie always said, were never empty. Not anymore.